What's up, it's your boy Dave Rubin, and today I'm going to talk about why the marketplace of IDs is kinda stupid and doesn't really work. So you used to hear a lot about this thing called the marketplace of IDs, but what is actually meant by this phrase? Well, the official definition is that the marketplace of IDs holds that the truth will emerge from the competition of IDs in free, transparent public discourse, and concludes that IDs and ideologies will be culled according to their superiority or inferiority and widespread acceptance among the population. So basically everyone can say whatever they want, and because everyone is talking, we the public can decide what is right and not so right. But this theory has a few problems. The first problem is what I call platform problem. This is that Twitter is a modern day public forum argument. Now, this idea gets mostly uttered by the right wing, but I think this is a problem for all sides of the political spectrum. Before you interpret me wrong, I'm not saying I think this means that Twitter shouldn't be allowed to throw whoever they want for whatever reason off their platform, because I'm not. Now, I do think this makes for bad business practices sometimes, but it is Twitter, a company which history is basically one massive list of bad business practices. The reason I don't think this would work is because if you are gonna force Twitter to have people on that platform, you kinda also have to do this with other influential platforms, including certain massively popular podcasts where the host likes to make these kind of arguments. Because if you think being on Twitter is a better way to truly be heard than the Joe Rogan experience, you're out of your fucking mind. The only reason Tulsi Gabbard is still somewhat politically relevant is because she was on Joe Rogan's podcast. And this doesn't just count for Joe, but also for every mainstream or independent platform. Why shouldn't Twitter get to be able to decide who they have on, but Fox News does? Now, here also lies a problem. If a massive platform that lets someone communicate their views to millions of people can decide who they give this privilege to, the marketplace of IDs doesn't really work. Because if all the attention on a topic goes to one point of view, while another point of view can be completely ignored, the marketplace can't really work. Because then one point of view won't even be considered by everyone. I'm not even saying that the platforms have evil intent on controlling the narrative, just that they have certain personal preferences. I have a friend who is a feminist leftist. I like talking to her and think she has interesting things to say. Maybe I will have her on my channel one day, but she definitely influences my thinking. I don't have any friends that are very religious Christians, not because of any specific reason. We just haven't crossed paths, which means my views will not get influenced by them, and it will be more difficult for those views to be communicated on this absolutely massive platform. So even in the example of my channel, the marketplace of IDs just doesn't happen. Now you might say, yeah, but I don't look at it from one side. I like looking at a certain issue from all sides. So I consume media from a bunch of different platforms. Which means the marketplace of IDs for me still works. To which I say, bullshit. Most people when they say something like that just mean that they looked at it from the so-called left point of view and the so-called right point of view. But have you ever considered an issue from the point of view of an anarcho-syndicalist? Probably not. There are so many ways of looking at an issue, especially when you look at it in detail. The idea that you are gonna consume all of them is insane. Just as it is insane to give a platform the responsibility to give every single argument a chance or the same pool, because people simply don't have enough time to consider all the viewpoints on an issue. And the second problem is the fact that nobody can understand any point if the IDs are not allowed to be communicated by the other side of the ID. An example of this is that the other or both sides just shout over each other. Sometimes this even happens when a third party is trying to control the communication.
Intentionally grant me the respect here. Grant me the respect.
It is crazy. This is crazy. We're talking about something that never launched. This whole thing is crazy. This whole thing is crazy. This is just a bunch of jealous YouTubers that were looking to take somebody down. I have to tell you this, I'm going nowhere. So if you don't like my face, if you guys don't like the way I talk, if you don't like my videos, if you don't like my videos, you're gonna have to stomach it. I advise you to block me.
Another way one side can decide to shut down the other side is by labeling them as deplorable things, like you are just a racist, cock, snowflake, etc. These are basically words that make a large group of people completely ignore whatever the other person has to say at that point. An extremer point of view is cancelling someone. Now, I'm not some right-winger who thinks that you should never cancel someone, because I do think cancellation is sometimes warranted. And in the next point, I'm gonna explain why. The third problem is the fact that people don't really care about facts, while popularity means a lot and gives a person more influence when arguing for his side of an idea. This can be because of charisma, social momentum, or fame. People who are charismatic, for instance, don't necessarily need to be right, but people will still believe them over someone who is not charismatic. Think about this. If you hear two people have an argument on something you know nothing about, and one person speaks well, is funny, handsome, and overall has a nice vibe, while the other person stutters, speaks nervously, is below average looking, and is a bit boring, who are you gonna listen to? Who are you gonna believe? I mean, there's a reason why almost every female Fox News anchor is a hot lawyer looking lady. Then there is momentum. If someone for whatever reason has a certain kind of social momentum behind them, people will immediately believe them over someone who is seen as slowing down this momentum. Think about how many things liberals just ignored about the lies that Hillary Clinton told just because they want a female president. I'm not saying wanting a female president is a bad thing, but still, this momentum allowed her to get away with a lot more things. And then there is fame. Famous people use their well-known and well-likedness as a way to give themselves more authority on a subject, and people unknowingly give it to them even when the person knows the idea is preposterous. Star power just blinds that person and makes them believe whatever that person is saying. The best example of this that I could find is a clip of Joe Rogan and Tim Dillon reacting to a Roger Waters interview. Now, a heads up, I personally really don't like Roger Waters and think his politics are uninspired anti-America bullshit. And he obviously has a massive ego and is super hypocritical. I'm also too young to have had the whole Pink Floyd craze and think the music overall is good but not amazing. His personal music is, in my opinion, meh, although I can see why people like it. Now, in this interview, Roger said a lot of facetious bullshit, and if you want me to, I can go and dissect the entire interview. But nearing the end of the interview, Roger says this.
Chinese didn't invade Iraq and kill 1 million people in 2003. In fact, as far as I can recall, hang on a minute, who have the Chinese invaded and murdered, slaughtered?
And a few minutes after that, Joe says this.
But that's wild that they aired that too, because
that's wild. Yeah,
I mean, he schooled that guy.
That's right.
I mean, the real point was China invading other countries. Like, they've never done it. This is not something they do.
Now, this is a blatant lie. China invaded loads of countries, like India, Korea. Now, you might say, wait a minute, China didn't invade Korea, they just helped the North Koreans. Yeah, just like the United States helped the South Vietnamese. So if China didn't invade Korea, the US didn't invade Vietnam. But besides that, there are still other countries China invaded, like the Soviet Union, the so-called ally, and Vietnam. 3 fucking times. Yeah, China invaded Vietnam on 3 separate occasions. Now, you might say, how is Joe supposed to know this? I didn't know this. Well, I left one country that China invaded out, and Joe for sure knew about this country. Tibet. Yeah, China invaded Tibet. Why do you think the Dalai Lama lives in exile? Joe knows this. He had a guy on his podcast who came in with a Tibetan flag face mask. But when Roger starts talking, the star power just makes it all disappear. This is a massive problem with the marketplace of ideas. The fact that star power can just ruin it all. This is why I think cancelling someone is sometimes warranted. If someone keeps using all these examples to manipulate the narrative in a very toxic and destructive way, it is your absolute right as an individual to say, yeah, I don't want that person in my campus or the venue I frequent a lot. This is why I absolutely agree that some places decided to cancel Roger Waters. Not only because of the China never invaded anyone comment, but also because of all the other insane and malicious shit he says. Again, if you want me to make make a video about that, please let me know. The fourth problem is the momentum of an ID, especially when emotions are involved. Everyone nowadays thinks, yeah, of course, Afghanistan was a bad war to get into, because it's pretty obvious. Even without the whole hindsight thing, at the time it still should have been pretty obvious that the US-Afghan war wasn't going to go well. But there's one thing you have to remember. When the debate on invading Afghanistan came up, or if you want to phrase it differently, when the marketplace about the idea of invading Afghanistan opened up, it was the 14th of September 2001, 3 days after 9/11. You really think a guy arguing against going into Afghanistan would have been listened to by anyone? And the war in Afghanistan is a rare example, not as in the fact that certain ideas being too emotionally loaded to have an actual serious societal discussion about, but in the fact that the emotions actually died down. I mean, think about the Israelis and Palestinians, or the Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, or the Serbians and the Bosnians, or the Serbians and the Kosovaks, or the Serbians and the Croats. There are loads of issues where there's just too much emotion for the marketplace of ideas to work, because one or either side will refuse to hear the other side out because of understandable emotional trauma. But this also goes to other topics, where just one side is very emotionally engaged. There are enough people who refuse to hear the other side on a topic because of a previous experience, like nuclear energy with the whole Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island experience, or military spending in Germany and Japan for obvious reasons. The fifth problem is that there are topics which are just too complicated and far-fetched for the marketplace of ID to do its work, even though in the end it will greatly affect people's lives. Like the possibility that the topic is too complicated for the average human to understand, or for all the groups affected to understand and speak up about, which means they won't engage with the topic. This brings a problem to the marketplace of IDs, because this means that the IDs won't be culled and judged inferior or superior by a large amount of the population, because they simply don't understand them. I'm not saying this is because I think a large amount of the population is stupid. What I am saying is that a large amount of the population can't engage all the time with complicated IDs, because they simply have bills to pay.
I got bills, I gotta pay.
They simply don't have time with your theoretical ideas based on Hegel on how the world works. Or they simply don't want to spend all that time reading into every single facet of your idea because they have a life. I mean, what kind of idiot would spend hours on something as idiotic as seriously thinking about whether or not an abstract idea, like for example the marketplace of ideas, is viable or not? What kind of loser would do that instead of going outside and talk to people? The sixth and last problem I will talk about is the fact that a lot of ideas and the arguments behind them require sources to back them up, especially in this world of fake news and so much conflicting information, which means that it is very hard to verify the validity of every single source, not only for the person who wants to be convinced about a certain idea, but also for the people arguing about the idea, because in this day and age any person can just pull up any kind of study and base their entire argument around it, to which the other side needs to go into the nitty-gritty details of the source to see if the source the argument was based on is even viable. In other words, it is way easier for one side of an idea to make an argument based on bad or wrong facts, because the responsibility of disproving that source is now solely on the other side, which is a way more difficult thing to do and requires way more effort, which means this is easily gained, and a person or group that wants a certain idea to get validity can just make a bunch of arguments based on bad sources, knowing the other side will have to put in way more time and effort disproving the source than goes into finding or creating it. Besides that, this also gives you the benefit of making the other side look uninformed when they haven't heard of your source before. Take this for an example. Let's say you want to make the argument that lemon ice cream is bad. Disgusting! And no one likes it, which makes making it a waste of time and resources. And your source for this argument is that the Willingston Jamali Institute held a survey in which 3 out of 4 people said that they severely disliked lemon ice cream. On the first hand, this sounds like a very good and kinda legit source, and if the person arguing for lemon ice cream doesn't know of the study, you can make it seem like he is uninformed on the topic, even though the Willingston Jamali Institute is just an institute you made up one day and the survey is just you asking your 4 friends from the Lemons Are Trash Club about what they think about lemon ice cream. This would obviously mean that there isn't a clear and fair exchange of ideas here. Now you might think this is a ridiculous example, but the problem is this kind of stuff happens all the time. Just think about the 9 out of 10 doctors say yada 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 commercials. And even if the data is clear and concise, you can still spin it to your side of the argument without lying. I, your boy Dave Rubin, as you know, speak Dutch and like to watch the mainstream news of both Belgium and the Netherlands from time to time. Again, this is a well established fact about your boy Dave Rubin. A thing I noticed during the pandemic is that the Belgian and Dutch news kept saying the total death toll instead of the percentage of deaths, which was interesting because while both countries were handling COVID kinda badly, this wasn't really noticed by the population as much, because the news kept saying the total death toll in their own countries and then the total death toll in countries like United States, Brazil and India, which made it seem like in the US, Brazil and India it was a lot worse. This of course isn't true. The United States and India are much more populous countries, which means it is normal that way more people would die there of COVID. But if you looked at the percentages, Belgium and the Netherlands actually did kinda bad. This is just another example of one side manipulating the narrative of an idea, in this case how a government responds to COVID, without using the sources properly of the arguments they make. All of this makes a marketplace of ideas completely untenable. I'm not saying free speech is a bad thing or the ideal of the marketplace of ideas is bad. All I'm saying is that it is an ideal and that in reality we as a population should be aware of these problems so we don't just blindly fall into its pitfall. So this was my video on the problems with the marketplace of ideas. I hope you enjoyed the video. This was your boy Dave Rubin. See you later.